Imagine it's August 6th, 1986. You're in Japan kneeling in front of a Famicom and you slide a thin yellow disc into a boxy add-on called the Disk System. The screen goes dark. Then a world unfolds beneath you. Caverns dripping in alien color. A planet called Zebes. Corridors that fold back on themselves and dare you to remember the way. Inside a suit of orange armor, you fight down through the rock for hours. And when it's finally over, when the last threat is gone, the game does something no game has done before. The hero takes the helmet off. And the hero the whole world assumed was a man isn't. You're looking at Samus Aran, and gaming just quietly rewrote one of the oldest assumptions. We're talking about all this and more on This Week in Video Game History. Welcome back, everyone. I'm your host, Doug Coleman, and this week we are covering August 3rd through August 9th, a week stacked with games that changed who gets to play, who gets to make them, and what happens when a game promises the entire universe. This week gave us the Nintendo landmark that hid a secret about its own hero, the one you just heard about, a Sega Saturn shooter almost nobody outside of Japan ever got their hands on, a game about raising puppies that quietly sold nearly 24 million copies, a pocket-sized war game whose story runs through some of the most darkest times in modern history, a puzzle game one guy built in his apartment that helped kick off this entire indie revolution, 18 quintillion planets, and the most infamous launch the industry has ever seen, and a pile of clumsy jellybeans that became the whole world's escape hatch during the lockdown. 7 games, 5 decades, and 3 stories worth slowing down for. So grab your controller and press start to continue. Here's everything that dropped the week of August 3rd through August 9th across gaming history. 7 games, 5 decades, and not a single quiet one in the bunch. Let's run it. We start on August 6th, 1986 in Japan on a floppy disk. Nintendo's R&D 1 team with Gunpei Yoki producing and a young composer named Hirokazu Tanaka scoring it, put out something that didn't look or feel like anything else on the Famicom. No score counter, no cheerful loop, just a lonely, echoing planet called Zebes and a map that trusted you to get lost in it. Metroid handed you a world and walked away. No arrows, no hand-holding, just locked doors and the slow, dawning sense that the upgrade you needed was somewhere back the way you came. It was tense, it was moody, and it hid that now legendary secret about who was inside the suit. North America wouldn't get it until the NES cartridge in August of 1987, but the disc came first, and decades later we'd name a whole genre after it. Not bad for a game with no music where music was supposed to go. And man, this game unlocks a lot of core memories for me. This and Zelda were the 2 games I worked hardest to beat and quickly became 2 of my all-time favorite games. Same calendar date, 12 years later, August 6th, 1998. And here's this episode's deep cut. Guardian Force from a studio called Success on the Sega Saturn in Japan, and pretty much only in Japan. It's a top-down shooter where you don't fly a ship, you drive a tank with a turret that rotates a full 360 degrees, spraying fire in every direction while the screen fills up with everything trying to end you. Here's the thing about the Saturn. In North America, it was already a lost cause, a console Sega was quietly walking away from. But in Japan, it became a shooter lover's paradise, home to some of the best arcade ports of its era. Games most Western players had never even heard of. Guardian Force is one of those. It sat locked behind a dead console and a region gap for 2 decades until a 2021 collection finally set it loose. If you like your history with a few forgotten gems, this is the one. August 8th, 2005, a game about petting puppies sold almost 24 million copies. Nintendogs, out of Nintendo's EAD studio, wasn't built for people like us, the ones who had been playing since the Atari days. It was built for everyone else. You used the touchscreen to scratch a puppy behind the ears. You called its name into the microphone and it looked up at you. There was no winning, no ending, no boss. And it became the second best-selling game on the entire Nintendo DS, behind only New Super Mario Bros. This is Nintendo pointing a flashlight at a room full of people the industry had been ignoring and finding millions of them. It's easy to be a little snobby about a puppy simulator, but don't be. This game is a big part of why gaming stopped being a niche and started being something your mom did on the couch. Same day, same console, completely different mood. August 8th, 2005 also gave us Advance Wars Dual Strike from Intelligent Systems, the strategy wizards behind Nintendo. This was the series jumped to the DS, and it used both screens to stack battles on top of each other, let you field two commanding officers at once, and chain their powers together into these gloriously overpowered combos. It looks adorable. Bright colors, cartoon tanks, chibi commanders grinning at you. And it plays a lot like a knife fight, one of the sharpest turn-based strategy games ever put on the handheld. But the Advance Wars story has a shadow in it, and it's tied on a date one calendar off from this one. We're going to come back to that one later in the episode because it's one of the strangest, saddest collisions between a video game and the real world you'll ever hear. Hold that thought. August 6th, 2008. One man, about $200,000 of his own money, and a puzzle game that helped change everything. Braid, made largely by Jonathan Blow with artist David Hellman, arrived on Xbox Live Arcade as part of that summer's download lineup, and immediately made people stop and stare. On the surface, it's a platformer about rescuing a princess. Underneath, it's a game about rewinding time, about regret, about the story you tell yourself versus what actually happened. It landed at 93 on Metacritic, the highest rated game on Xbox Live Arcade at the time, and it proves something the industry hadn't fully believed yet, that a tiny team or even a single person could make something that stood shoulder to shoulder with games built by hundreds. That idea was about to blow the doors off the entire medium. And we'll get into exactly how a little later. August 9th, 2016. 18 quintillion planets and one of the most infamous launches in the history of the medium. No Man's Sky from a tiny British studio called Hello Games promised a universe, a genuinely unimaginable number of worlds, each one procedurally generated, all of it seamless, all of it explorable. The hype was volcanic, and when it launched, a lot of what players thought they'd been promised simply wasn't there. The backlash was ugly, personal, and relentless. Hello Games went silent. A lot of studios would have folded, taken the money, and walked. This one did the exact opposite. And what happened next became one of the greatest comeback stories in gaming, which, again, we are going to sit down and tell properly before this episode is done. For now, just remember the date, August 9th, 2016. The day the universe launched and immediately fell to Earth. And we finish in the strangest summer most of us can remember, August 4th, 2020. The world was locked inside, and out came 60 wobbling jellybeans in a candy-colored obstacle course. Fall Guys Ultimate Knockout, from Metatonic and published by Devolver Digital, took the Battle Royale, this brutal last one standing format, and made it soft, silly, and impossible to be angry at. You dove through fruit. You fell off spinning platforms. You lost, laughed, and hit play again. Free that month for PlayStation Plus members, it detonated into a full-blown phenomenon almost overnight, and became one of the most downloaded games the service had ever seen. But the reason it mattered wasn't the numbers. It was the timing. For a few weeks, in a very lonely year, a game about clumsy little beans falling over gave millions of people something to do together, when together was the one thing we couldn't be. Sometimes, that's the whole job. So let's go back to Braid, because that little time-rewinding puzzle game was the first real crack in a dam that was about to burst. For decades, the math of making a game that mattered was brutal and simple. You needed a studio. You needed a publisher willing to fund you. You needed shelf space in a store and a marketing budget to get people through that door. And if you didn't have all four of those things, you basically didn't exist. Then, right around 2008, a few things happened at the same time. Digital storefronts changed the whole equation. Xbox Live Arcade first, and then Steam, meant you no longer needed a publisher or a spot on a shelf. You could put your game directly in front of millions of people from your own living room. The tools to build games got cheaper and better, and Braid walked straight through that open door and proved the thing nobody had quite let themselves believe yet. That one person with a vision and a couple $100,000 could make something critics would rank right beside games built by hundreds of people with tens of millions of dollars. And then the floodgates opened. That same year, a physics puzzler called World of Goo, made by two ex-Electronics Arts guys. Then Limbo, a haunting little silhouette of a game that we talked about last week. Super Meat Boy, from a two-man team who called themselves Team Meat. Fez, from Phil Fish, and a rough little block-building game called Minecraft, made largely by a single Swedish programmer. That would go on to become the best-selling video game of all time. Full stop. In 2012, a documentary called Indie Game, the movie, captured the whole raw, anxious, beautiful thing. Developers pouring their entire lives and their savings into something with zero guarantee that anyone would care. It was a genuine renaissance, and it permanently rewired who gets to make games in the first place. That's a story far too big to cram into a couple of minutes, so we're going to give it an episode all its own. Keep an eye out for it. Now back to that universe that fell to Earth, because the real story of No Man's Sky doesn't start or end on launch day. Rewind to Christmas Eve 2013. The offices of Hello Games, a tiny little studio in Guildford, England, flooded. A nearby river broke its banks and poured in through the windows, and they lost nearly everything. Computers, monitors, furniture, months of work gone overnight. And they kept going anyway, because they were building something almost insanely ambitious. A game with 18 quintillion planets, an entirely procedurally generated galaxy out of a team you could count on two hands. The hype became a tidal wave. Studio founder Sean Murray went on The Late Show, and Stephen Colbert, only half-jokingly, called him a god. And then on August 9th, 2016, it launched. And the distance between what people expected and what was actually there was staggering. Features players were sure they'd been promised simply weren't in the game. Two players who managed to find each other in that enormous universe on that very first day discovered they couldn't even see one another. The backlash was enormous, and it got personal. The marketing was formally investigated, and Hello Games went completely, utterly silent. No apologies, no excuses, nothing. And here's the part that makes this a story worth telling. They weren't hiding. They were working. Update after update for years, and every single one of them free. It took until July of 2018, almost 2 full years, for an update called Next to finally deliver the real multiplayer people thought they had bought at launch. And they still didn't stop. Patch after patch until the game everyone mocked became a game people genuinely deeply love. It's one of the greatest redemption arcs this industry has ever seen, but it's not the only game that launched in pieces. Some crawled their way back. Some just died. The whole era, the overpromises and the disasters and the comebacks, is a story we're going to have to sit down and tell properly. That one's coming. And here's the thought I asked you to hold on to. To really feel it, you need to know that Advance Wars wasn't new in 2001. The series was born in Japan all the way back in August of 1988 as Famicom Wars, and for over a decade it stayed there. Japanese players got sequel after sequel while the West got nothing. So when the original Advance Wars finally crossed the ocean to North America on September 10th, 2001, it was a genuine event. For most of us over here, it was our very first taste of one of the sharpest strategy series Nintendo had ever quietly been sitting on. And it had exactly one day of a normal life. The next morning was September 11th, and overnight, a bright, cartoonish game about tanks and artillery and commanding officers barking orders to invade became something no company on Earth could comfortably put in front of people. Nintendo pushed the European release all the way back to January of 2002. Japan wouldn't see this version for years. A fun, harmless, joyful little strategy game, effectively shelved by history itself, because the timing had turned unthinkable. And here's the detail that still gives me chills. It happened again. 2 decades later, in 2022, Nintendo had a gorgeous modern remake of these exact same games ready to ship. Advance Wars 1+2 Reboot Camp. And days before it was due out, war broke out in Europe, and they delayed it too, officially, in light of recent world events. The same cheerful little war game colliding with real war 21 years apart. That is one of the strangest, saddest, most human intersections between this hobby we love and the world outside it. And there is far more to say about it than a couple of minutes could ever hold. So we're going to give it the room it deserves in an episode all of its own. It's a heavy one, and it's worth it. Think back to where we started. August 6th, 1986. A kid in Japan sets down the controller after hours in the dark on a planet called Zebes, watches the helmet come off, and realizes the hero was never who anyone assumed. That's the whole week, really. That one small moment of a game refusing to be what you expected. Because look at what else this week gave us. A game about raising puppies that turned out to be for everyone, not just us. One person in an apartment who proved you never needed permission in the first place. A universe that launched broken and crawled its way back to being beloved. And a cheerful little war game that ran headfirst into a day none of us will ever forget. Every one of them broke an assumption about what a game could be, who it was for, or what it could mean. That's the thing about this medium. Just when you think you've got it all figured out, you know what games are, who plays them, who makes them. It takes the helmet off, and it's something you never saw coming. 50 years in, and it's still surprising us. That's why we keep showing up. All right, everyone, that's it for this episode. Thank you very much for watching and listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please drop us a follow on YouTube, Spotify, or Apple Podcasts. Drop us a comment while you're at it. We'd love to hear from you. Artwork for the show was done by Ms. Tink. Music done by Shane Mandini. Go follow both of them on Twitch, and Shane has a new single dropping very soon. Go follow him on Spotify. The show is written, produced, and hosted by Doug Coleman. Be sure to save your game, nerds. I'll see you next week.